Alright, it's finally time that I made a video I've been promising you for like 4 months now, or at least approaching 4 months, and that is my definition and the definition I'll be using on this channel going forward about Souls-likes, since I feel like the definition that currently exists is super muddied. Because it seems like most people think that a Souls-like is just a really hard game and that's like it, and that's like nothing else to it. No world, but it has nothing to do with the storytelling or the way the world is set up. No, it's just hard. And I think that's a really, really weird definition because in that way everything could be a Souls-like. Does that mean that a day one raid in Destiny is the Souls-likes of Destiny? Like, no. So we have to like, I feel like we have to like talk a little bit about it, just because it's a very interesting subject and it allows for some talking points. I think the issue I really want to talk about here is the fact that, or well, issue is a big word for it, but it's the fact that Souls-like as a term has been muddied because it's been used in so many ways to just describe difficulty. A good example of that is Hunt the Night. Hunt the Night is a really, really hard game. I covered it on this channel. That game beat the shit out of me. It is a hard bullet hell. However, it's also pretty fucking awesome and it's really, really recommended, but like, it's not a Souls-like as such. Yes, it does have some exploration, but it's very rarely used to the full extent of something like Dark Souls or Elden Ring or Sekiro or Nioh or any of those games, or Remnant for that matter. However, it still has the term Souls-like. And I feel like it's because often what ends up happening is that people see that it's hard and then they immediately slap this term on it. And I think that's a little bit of a problem. It's become such an umbrella term that games like Cuphead, Hollow Knight, Dark Souls, Sultan Sanctuary, Hunt the Night, Death Trash, hell, even Feet Simulator on Steam are all on the same category. Why? Now, obviously, it has to be said, it's not that this is like a super big deal. It's just that to, sort of clear up the term. So you know what I mean when I say that this game is a Souls-like, and so we can probably get a little bit more of a clear term when it comes to Souls-like. Because Souls-like is this muddy term. And to that end, there are 4 key elements I think about when I'm talking about a Souls-like. It is 1, combat, 2, it's the exploration, 3, it's the theming, and 4, it's the storytelling. I feel like all of those 4 together combined makes a pretty good Souls-like. I feel like that's like how you can like sort of describe a Souls-like, not necessarily just on the difficulty. So let's just start by talking about combat. So combat in a Souls game is typically action focused. However, that's not to say it can't be, well, strategic based. I would argue that you can have a game that is super slow, that is very much so, how should I put it, turn based even, and still have it be a Souls-like. I think when it comes to combat and Souls-like, it means it has to be super oppressive. In the sense that it doesn't feel like you get a lot of chances, it can feel a little bit unfair. A good, in my opinion, example of a game that feels super unfair at times is Lies of P that I've been going through. Some of the buttons are literally so sensitive on my PS5 controller that me touching one of them instantly casts as like the arm thing, like your Legion arm. It instantly uses it, and when you don't have any more juice in the Legion arm, it means that you are all of a sudden caught in a 2 to 3 second animation of your character just shaking his arm wildly around while not being able to move, which often instantly causes you to get hit and punished. I think that is the perfect description, actually, of what I mean when I say oppressive. Because here's the thing, that is super fucking oppressive. You accidentally fuck up once and it can cost you your entire attempt. And I think that same thing can be said in a lot of turn-based cases. A good example of a turn-based game that does exactly that, with super oppressive combat, is Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is not necessarily a hard game per se, but there's this one boss, and I'm not going to spoil too much about it, but there's this one boss that has a effect where essentially he can make himself reflect any attack other than one, and there's like no way of seeing that. You just sort of have to learn the rotation yourself and remember where you are in it. which is to say when he reflects it, he does full damage back to you from your attack, which often ends up meaning that you just one-shot yourself. And while not necessarily hard once you figure it out, because once you figure it out, it's literally just follow his rotation. If he's on fire, then you use fire, then ice, and so on. But until you get there, God, it can be hard. It was so impressive. I think it took me 3 hours to beat. That's a perfect example of combat system that is super oppressive. However, an example of something that is categorized as a Souls-like, but in my opinion doesn't really have a good combat system, despite the fact that I really like the game, is Steel Rising. Steel Rising is the game where you're playing during the French Revolution as an animatronic. And this like animatronic army has gone amok and whatnot. Like, I'm not gonna get into the story of it, but in that game specifically, there is this combat system where often you just freeze the enemies and you go over and punch them, or you apply a status element and then you just punch them. And often it ends up being this really, really free system to abuse, because it's literally right there, right? Like, you shoot them a couple of times with your elemental gun, they freeze, you go over and deal massive damage to them, then you jump away and do it again. It sort of removes a lot of the fun to it, and I get you could argue that, oh, just don't use it. But at the same time, if it's there, I think you should be fully allowed to use it and still have the best experience with the game. And I honestly do think that it takes a little bit away from it. So that's what I mean when I say like combat within these like 4 key elements. So to describe what I mean with exploration, it is essentially the feeling that especially Elden Ring is really good at doing your first playthrough, where you go into this area and you don't know what's in there. And then you find a bunch of enemies and you struggle through it. There's a boss fight. And you keep going and you find these random items. Another good example of that is actually God of War. Despite the fact that I don't really think it's a Souls-like, despite the fact that it could realistically be a Souls-like, but it doesn't have the difficulty that a lot of people want to throw onto Souls-like, so it hasn't been categorized officially as such. But it is, by all, in my opinion, my definition, it is a Souls-like. God of War has exactly that thing, where there are all these hidden items that you have plenty of opportunities to discover, to explore, and to find through just being curious about the world and the place it's set in. And I think that enhances the game on almost every level. And also, it's like universally beat Hollow Knight, even like the commonly agreed on, like Hollow Knight, Blasphemous, Endless Leylies, Elden Ring, Dark Souls, the Father of Souls itself, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, all of them have those elements, right? Lies of P is the one I've been going through right now that has exactly that, where there are hidden items, albeit you can debate how hidden they are, but they exist, they are like there. And you can explore to sort of find them very much in an immersive sim style, where they're like off the path, but if you go out and explore, you are like rewarded for that exact action. And despite the fact that often your reward can be like an entire new area with new fights and everything like that, which is super fucking cool. And I often think that's like a big part of it, especially for Souls-likes for me, is like that sense of exploration. If that wasn't there, I don't think I could see myself calling it a Souls-like really. Again, I'm going to use Death Trash because while yes, there are some exploration, it is sort of limited, especially in the earlier builds of the game. Now it's probably gotten a little bit better since last time I played it, but in the earlier builds I played, there wasn't a whole lot, being completely honest with you. And when I say exploration, I don't mean the on the surface level Starfield exploration where you just go there and out there 5 minutes, like there's that in almost every game, but like I mean the true in-depth exploration, like Soul style, like what I just described, right? I think that is a huge element in Souls. Now, this might be the point that's the hardest to like prove when it comes to this, and that is the theming of Dark Souls. I think the themation of the Souls franchise, all of them being these dark, decrepit worlds that once used to be prosperous and then sort of fell into ruin as you explore them and you find out more about it, has a lot to do with what I personally like about Souls. And it goes all the way back to like those stories of people being like essentially playing Dark Souls and having that depression and sort of all that cured. I think to create the feeling that Dark Souls has, you need to have the theme that it also has. In the sense of Dark Souls, it's this prosperous world that used to run really well and everything was going great. And, then it didn't anymore. and it's an uncaring, brutal place to be in now. And I think almost every quote unquote Souls like copies, or doesn't copy, but uses those exact same themes. Take as an example Lies of P. Krat, as far as I've gotten into the game, used to be this prosperous world where, you know, there was opportunities galore, there was money to be made, and all of that stuff. Like things used to be good. And then the puppets sort of went insane. I haven't gotten to why yet, and I'm gonna be talking about that in the video about Lies of P. But the puppets went insane, and you know the entire world sort of started to collapse slowly. And well, not slowly, it went like fucking hog wild. And the place you get into when you enter the game, like probably only just a week later, it sounds like it's a pretty recent thing. It's completely different. It's uncaring. It doesn't need you there. But the signs of a functioning civilizations are still everywhere. And you'll still find people. And like the world is uncaring about you. It's also why it's so easy for it to beat you down at time and time again. It's also what makes it so good. Endless Later is just exactly the same thing. Having you see like visions of the glorious kingdom that used to be, and everything like that, before showing you that it isn't like that anymore. When you enter the game, it's not glorious, it's not beautiful, it's nothing like that anymore. And I think that's like a major part of like the entirety of this like Souls thing, because for me that's pretty important to me, like the theming of the game, as it creates a sense of, well, it creates the vibe essentially of the game. And the vibe of Souls is a very much that oppressive feeling that is shown in both the combat and the theming, the story, everything, right? And I think that's why it's so important to also have the theming done right. Now, it can be said that you can do a Souls games or Souls-like without set theming. I just have yet to see a Souls-like be super happy and endearing and like really on it, and then also be good, you know. I think the setting has a lot of, you know, has a lot to do with it. And that sort of closes that point and brings me to my final point when it comes to what I think a Souls-like is. All right, so talking about the last point I really wanted to talk about is the storytelling. Storytelling in Souls game has been sort of divided, I feel like. Especially after Elden Ring won Story of the Year last year at the Game Awards, I feel like there are a group of people who don't think that's deserved because they don't think Elden Ring has a story. However, I would argue just because Elden Ring has a different way of telling its story, it still has a story. Same as Dark Souls and Lies of P at this point, like mostly all of the other ones. While yes, you get the major like events yourself, most of the story is told through the items you pick up, it's told through the environment, and it's told through lore that you have to read through on the descriptions of said items. You have to piece together the lore itself as sort of a puzzle rather than it just being delivered to you. And I think that's what a lot of Souls games tend to do, and it's honestly one of the things that makes them super special. It's the fact that they don't give you the entire picture immediately. You have to sort of work for the story to really come into place. And you could argue that that's a downside, like you don't like it when you have to read the lore on the different items and you have to look for symbols here and there and everywhere. I would argue it's a huge strength of those franchises that use that, especially when they use it as well as something like Elden Ring or Dark Souls or Bloodborne or Lies of P or any of those games. I think it's a huge advantage. And I think that is one of the things that Souls in general does, where the majority of the storytelling is relatively told through that. It's told through the environment, it's told through the lore, and it is not directly delivered to you. It's sort of like a puzzle that you have to piece together what happened and why it's happening and everything like that. And I think that's a huge benefit, honestly, and as I said, I think it's good. And I think all those 4 points really combine into making a Souls game for me. And I think that's like the definition of a Souls-like. I don't necessarily think the definition has anything to do with difficulty, as I would argue that God of War is a Souls-like. I would also argue that Nier Automata is a Souls-like. And both of those, while they do break one of these like elements, I don't think every game needs to follow like all 4 strictly to be a Souls-like. But I do think like at least a couple of them needs to be in place before you can call something a Souls-like. And something like Nier and God of War follow at least like the three first ones. While no, they don't directly talk about the like story super vaguely, like it is very much so worn on their theme. I'd say it's one of the huge things about both of those games. I'd argue the exploration elements, the combat elements, the entire like world itself, like how oppressive it can be, is often sort of the game's benefit. Nier Automata is the world after humanity is gone and it's like being invaded by those robot alien type of things. It's been a while since I last played it, but I'd argue that that is a super oppressive setting. Just like I'd argue the combat being in the sense that it is super oppressive. In God of War, there are the berserkers that fucking smack you in Ragnarok, or the Valkyries in God of War 2016. Just like in Nier, I think a lot of the bosses are really oppressive to fight. I think that's often the case in these games, and like I don't see that as being an issue necessarily. I think they do classify as being Souls-like myself, like God of War and Nier, as an example. But that being said, obviously I am not the only person who talks about this, who has an opinion on it. This has just been my opinion. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, you can do the YouTube stuff. Other than that, I want to say thank you for watching it. Thank you for listening to me ramble about Souls for like the last 10 minutes or so. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who stuck around until now. And I will see you all later. Goodbye.